Hi, my name is Blaine from Walker Scott, and in this series we'll be covering a wide range of look and feel and navigation within D365 Finance and Operations. In this particular session, I'll be covering creating and managing records. It should be noted that I'm using a standard Microsoft D365 Finance and Operations environment with Microsoft's Contoso demo data. So let's jump in. So first of all, we're going to try and create a customer. So by creating a new customer, we're going to navigate to all customers. And most forms in Dynamics 365 have this new button to create new records. So we're going to do that. We're going to click the new button. And for the customer creation, we get a side form where you'll see that mandatory fields are highlighted with a */*. These highlight that these are mandatory fields. So in this case, customer account isn't being populated by a number sequence, so I would have to populate this manually. So I've now populated the customer account. I'll give it a name, Hungry Bear, and I can assign this to a customer group. From that, once I've populated the mandatory fields, I can then click Save, and it will populate with the customer master details, and I can then proceed to add more fields and more of the mandatory fields as well that my organization may require. So adding things like addresses, you can see that there is a wide range of fields in this. You can also make fields mandatory, which we'll cover in personalizations. I'm now going to do a simple example of creating a record using the customer groups. So if I navigate to customer groups, which I have in my favorites, you can see that we have a list of customer groups. And again, this form also has the new button, and the shortcut key is Alt-N. So again, this shows which of the mandatory fields are required for this customer group creation, which is the customer group itself. So I'm going to give this a group of 60 and call it difficult customers, and give it a terms of payment of net 10 and net 30. So while these aren't mandatory, they are extremely important fields. And again, as I said, we can make certain fields mandatory through personalizations. I can then hit save, but also if I click back, the back button is really important in that the back button does not discard changes. It will actually save the changes that have been made. So it's very similar to hitting the save button. Hitting back will actually save these changes. So if I click save and I can refresh, the 60 will then appear in the list numerically. And if I'm not happy with this, I can edit the record, but I can also delete some records as well. So I can simply delete that record that I've created, and I can also work my way back. So hitting the back button, I can navigate back to customers. So I'm going to navigate back to my customers for all customers. And in this case, we would cover how to update records. So I've got a list of records here, and I can jump into a record. I can use the edit button and edit the entire grid. But if I've got some additional fields that I want to add, I want to jump into this particular customer master. And as you can see, it's still not quite on the edit mode. You have two options. You can click on the edit button, which is F2. Alternatively, you can hover over a field where it's got the pencil icon and left click on the pencil icon. From there, I can give this a organization number, and at this point in time, it has not yet saved. So as I mentioned, if I click the back button, it will actually save these changes. So the default position of Dynamics is that it will save throughout your movements in the system. And what I mean by that is if I toggle now to show list, and if I'm working my way through records, so I'm currently on Forest Wholesales, I've added the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If I move off onto Cave Wholesales and then jump back to Forest, you can see that change has been saved. So in this case, if I wanted to add another number, Let's change that to 22222. And I feel like I've made a mistake. Hitting back will actually save the record. Toggling to another record will also save the record. So there are really just two options to revert changes. The first option is to hit the escape key on your keyboard. Now this prompts to say, do you want to save your changes before closing? So yes, we'll save them, and no, we'll discard those changes. So you can see the 222 has disappeared. The alternative option is to revert the changes under Options and then clicking this Revert button. So when I click Revert, you can see the 222 has disappeared. So it's really important when you're updating records to remember that as you toggle between records, it's going to save those changes. And also, if you hit the back button, it's going to save those changes as well. So if you are unsure, you can hit the escape key, as I mentioned, and then click no, or under the options, under the action ribbon, click the revert option as well. Now I'm going to talk about deleting records. So deleting records really depends on what you're trying to delete. So for example, there are some records in the system that you cannot delete. So if I try to delete this cave wholesales, it'll say, no, you cannot delete this because there are transactions that exist against this customer. So Dynamics has validations in place where you cannot just delete things, everything in the system. There is validation there to prevent customers and certain values in the system from being deleted. There is the option to also insert records from Open in Excel, which we'll cover in a separate session. And we're now going to cover how to add records that have dates in them. So to do this, I'm going to jump into a general journal. And I'm going to click on this journal that I've created the header for earlier. And what you'll notice is that I have a journal here already. Now, what I'd like to discuss is the dates option. So if you are entering a date for the current month, you don't have to type the entire date. So for example, if I was to type in the 15th of this month, I would simply type 15 and I can tab across and it will populate the month and the year. If I'm looking for the previous month, I would have to type 15, then 02, then as I tab across, it will populate the month prior. Then if you need the entire year, so for example, if it was the 15th of December 22, you can see I'd need to type in the entire date. Now you can type in also the forward slashes as well, and that will populate as well. If you'd like to populate today's date, there is a shortcut called the letter T for today. And if I tab across, that gives you the today's date. What's also a nice feature is the calendar itself, where you can actually just pick a day. You can toggle between months and pick another day, or you can also toggle between the years. So if I needed to go back to last year, go back to December 31st. And also you can toggle the months by left-clicking or right-clicking. You can also clear the date, and you can also select today's date as well. That's a little bit about how to enter dates when entering records. The last thing I'm going to cover then is that you can actually copy and paste values from an Excel spreadsheet. Now this can be a little bit tricky, and depending on what you're copying, I am going to just quickly copy and paste something that I have from Excel, and you can see that when I click save, it's actually populated it in the incorrect field because I didn't align my spreadsheet to the columns. So in order to fix that, I will fix up my copy and paste to make sure that my columns are in the right spot, and from there I can then copy and paste over the top, and you can see that, again, some of this information isn't valid because it hadn't replaced the previous set of data. So you do need to just be really careful when you're copying and pasting. You need to make sure that the columns align to what you're copying and pasting, and that the values are correct as well. So in this session, we've covered a lot. We've covered how to create new records, how to update records, and also how to revert your changes if you've accidentally made a mistake. We've talked about deleting records, and we've talked about data entry tips, as well as copying and pasting records from Excel. Now, you can also import data using data management and the Open in Excel functions, and we'll be covering those in a separate session. Thank you.